Welcome to the second episode of the Time Bets Poker Vlog. My name's Tyler, this is Kit Kat, and today we're going to go over the second session we played while on our poker trip in Florida. This is a fun one where we get into a bunch of big pots, and while recording this episode, I was able to analyze a bunch of the mistakes I made that will hopefully improve my game in future sessions. I hope you guys enjoy it, so let's get to it. The next stop on our Florida poker trip is the Best Bet in Jacksonville, Florida. I walked in and see the room is completely packed for a weeknight. This is really exciting because rooms back home were pretty slim and it was hard to find a decent game. The tables also don't have plexiglass, which is a huge bonus for me because I love to talk to other players. Another notable thing that stood out right away was they had a live stream booth back in the corner. I asked the counter what game the live stream was, and they told me it was 2-5 deep stacks. I asked her if there was any way I could get on the list, and she said she could add me. She said there wasn't any guarantee since most players sign up in advance, but she would call me if they had an open spot. We ended up sitting down at a regular 2-5 game right away because there was at least 7 tables going at the time. In the first hand, we're in the big blind, and there's a $10 straddle under the gun. It folds to us, and we look down at Jack 10 suited. I never like to limp in straddle pots, because there's always the type of player who likes to squeeze their straddle. Wait, that didn't come out right. Let me try again. There's always a player who likes to raise when they've already put in the straddle. That's a little more appropriate. I also think Jack 10 suited is too good of a hand to fold, not good enough to limp and then call a raise. So I elect to raise myself to make sure any weak holdings fold out pre-flop. If I get a call, I know I'm up against a decent hand. The straddler does defend and makes the call. We go heads up to a flop. The flop comes Queen 9-4, 2 diamonds. I lead for 25, continuing my story. Under the gun, to my surprise, puts in the raise to 125. With such a powerful combo draw with both straight and flush draws, I know that if I hit, I'll get paid by all overpairs and sets. Getting 2-1 on a call, I throw out the chips. The turn comes an offsuit 6. I check for pot control and hope to get a free river card. The player checks back. The river comes the 8 of clubs, giving us the nut straight. I decide to lead because I really don't want to let this river check through. The player quickly makes a call, and I announce that I have the straight.
Call. Straight.
We scoop a nice sized pot early on in the session.
It was a very, very bad river.
In the next hand, we're dealt 4-5 of diamonds in the hijack. We get a couple limpers ahead of us and decide to limp and go 5 ways to a flop. Flop comes 5-3-6 rainbow, giving us middle pair and open-ended straight draw. It checks to me, and I lead for 15. 15? 2 players make the call. The turn comes another 5. Big blind checks to us, and we bet $20. The cutoff and the big blind both make the call. River comes another 6, which we really don't like to see, especially in a limp pot. So I bet 50 as a blocker bet, hoping a 6 will flat call. The cutoff makes the call and shows pocket 7s. We take it down, and it's a decent size for a limp pot. It now puts our stack over 2 buy-ins. Yeah, I turned the chips. The player on my left was the same player from the first hand. She's giving me quite a bit of information about her thought process from the first hand, laying the ground for the rest of the session. I'm usually a very friendly, talkative player at the table. I find it's really important to bring good vibes and just have an overall positive energy. It makes people more likely to want to play hands with you and more likely to put money in the pot, which makes the game far more fun to play. I don't enjoy grinding, headphones in, not talking like a machine where all I care about is winning other people's money. A common thing you'll hear me say is, I'm only here for the high hand. I don't want to take your money. I'd rather take money from the casino, which is definitely true. Now, don't get me wrong. If players put their money in the pot, I'll try to take that too. But I much more enjoy the dynamics of poker, just the game itself. I'm not in it only to win money. In the next hand, we're dealt ace-9 of diamonds on the button. Middle position opens to $20, and I decide that I'm going to raise to push out any small pairs and give the blinds a bad price to call.
Raise.
It folds back to middle position raiser, and he makes the call. The flop comes ace-jack-7 rainbow, giving us top pair, but not much else. Middle position checks. We continue our story that we have a strong hand and bet $50. The middle position player calls. The turn is a deuce of diamonds. The middle position player checks, and we check for pot control. The river comes an offsuit 8. Middle position leads this time for 55. It seems like an odd number to value bet since it's only around a quarter pot. It's possible he could be really strong here and trying to induce a bluff, but a 4-1 call is a great price with top pair, even if he has me outkicked. We make the call and the player hesitates to show his hand. I hold back because I was very curious what he had. He ends up showing king-jack for middle pair. I guess he took my check on the turn as weakness and figured he was value betting his jack on the river, or possibly putting in the blocker bet so that an ace didn't make a half pot or bigger size bet that he would want to call. All in all, we take down another sizable pot. Next, we're in the small blind and look down at king 10 of clubs. Everyone folds to the button, who opens to 25. I think in this spot, we could fold or raise, but seeing that the player on my left is not aggressive at all, I elect to flat and see a flop. The big blind flats, and we go 3 ways. The flop comes deuce 6-10 with 2 clubs. This is pretty good for us, seeing we have top pair and a draw to the second nut flush. We check, and both players check. The turn comes a jack of hearts. We check, big blind checks, and the button bets 30. This jack doesn't really change our hand, but it could have improved the button's hand. There's possible straight draws, and we only have second pair now, but we end up flatting to try and see a cheap river. The river comes a 10 of hearts, which improves us to trips. Is definitely likely we have the best hand, and rather than having this check through, I decide on a large bet of around 3/4 pot. With this sizing, I'm trying to represent a misflush and hopefully get a call from pocket 7s or better. I think most players would call with top pair on this board and with my sizing. It folds through though, and looking back, I think it would probably be better to bet on the smaller side. This way I could extract value from weaker holdings or possibly induce the raise. We scoop though and add to our growing stack. In the next hand, we're dealt pocket 10s in the big blind. It folds to the hijack, who opens for 20. The button calls, small blind folds, and we 3-bet to 85.
Raise. 85.
This way we can narrow down our opponent's range and hopefully isolate the player who has the best hand. The hijack calls, and it works because the button folds. We go heads up to a flop of 9-6-5 with 2 hearts. We decide to play passive because we're out of position and see what the opponent does. Fortunately for us, our opponent decides to check. Turn comes a 3 of spades, which shouldn't change much. It's not likely our opponent called with deuce 4 or 4-7. We still check to see if the opponent will add money to the pot. He doesn't. The river comes another 3. This time we put out a little under half pot size bet. Hopefully get a call from ace high. Our opponent does call. We show our 10s and take it down. I never get to see what he had. Most likely ace high or maybe a suited ace with a paired kicker. In the next hand, we look down at the second best starting hand in Texas Hold'em, the Cowboys, aka Pocket Kings. The woman on my left, who's been giving away a ton of information, told me her husband is sitting across the table. They both seem nice. I've learned from observation so far that their play styles are on both ends of the spectrum. She's a passive player, and he's very aggressive. He's been 3-betting a lot pre-flop, doing power raises all night, and opening a large percentage of hands. In this hand, he opens again for $20. He gets one caller, who seems like a very novice rec player. It folds to me. I go for a slightly bigger bet than I normally would, with a price of $90. Both players end up making the call. The flop comes Jack 8-5 Rainbow. Both players check. I c-bet to 150. The husband calls, and the rec player folds. The turn comes the 9 of hearts, bringing in straight draws and flush draws. We both check. River comes another 5. The husband checks. I check and ask, do you have aces? He says no, and I show my hand too fast so we don't get to see his hand. I do this a lot, even though it would probably improve my game to not show first. We take down another sizable pot, making this an amazing session so far. We get dealt ace-queen off on the button, and flat call a sizable bet of 45. We end up laying it down on the flop because the early position player goes all in. He ends up having pocket 10s for a flopped set versus the other player who had ace-king with top pair. We're really glad in this position that we did not put in the re-raise pre-flop. Otherwise, we would have lost the maximum. In the next hand, we're dealt 8-5 of clubs in the cutoff. 2 players limp, so we also decide to limp with suited cards to see the cheap flop. The button limps, but the small blind raises to 35. One of the limpers call. I decide to call for about a 3-1, possibly 4.5-1 if the button puts in the call. I'm basically in position, sitting in the cutoff, even if the button calls, because she's a really passive player and not necessarily a threat. She does make the call, and we go 4 ways to a flop. The flop comes 6-deuce-10 with 2 clubs. The small blind c-bets for 70. The hijack folds, and we call with our flush draw. The turn comes a 4 of diamonds, improving our equity by adding the gut shot straight draw, along with our flush draw. The small blind slows down, starting to show weakness by checking. I put him on a big holding like ace-king, ace-queen, or possibly jacks. I bet 125 to take control of the action and use my positional advantage. The small blind thinks about it for a while and finally makes the call. It's possible he had a suited ace with clubs, so I could be dead if another club comes on the river. I acknowledge this in my head and prepare to just flat call the river if another club comes, instead of putting myself in a tough spot by raising. The river doesn't come a club, but comes the 7 of diamonds. That's right, boys and girls. We have the nuts in a bloated pot with 8-5 of all hands. The only thought I have right now is how do I get as much money in this pot as possible? The small blind checks, and I decide on 2 times my last raise for $250. The player thinks for a moment, which was most likely Hollywooding with ace-king, or he could have been contemplating to put in the bluff. Eventually, he lets it go. We don't extract anymore with our straight, and the player says it was too much. We still take down a sizable pot, bringing us up to almost 4 times our buy-in. We fooled it a bit, won a few pots, but for this session, they're on the smaller size, so I don't see any benefit to analyzing them. Then we're dealt pocket 8s in the cutoff. I'm not going to do graphics for this one, but I think it's relevant for the next hand. We get a limper and I open for $20. The button calls, but the small blind raises to 85. It seems like a good squeeze spot for him. Big blind folds, the limper folds. I decide to flat call even though I'm getting a bad price. But I also know that the passive button player will likely fold or flat call, and I would get to see the flop in position. The button does make the fold, and we go heads up to the flop. The flop comes 3-7 ace with 2 hearts, giving us second pair. Small blind checks, and we bet 100 to see where we're at. The small blind does make the call. So at this point, I decide there's no way I'm putting in any more money unless I catch a set. The turn comes an offsuit jack. We both check. The river comes offsuit king, putting the straight and 3 overs. He bets 160, which seems completely like a value sizing, so I quickly throw my cards in the muck. The very next hand, we're dealt a couple snowmen again. This time there's a straddle on, and one player limps. We raised to $50. The small blind calls. It folds to the limper, and he makes the call. The flop comes king 7-6 rainbow, leaving us again with second pair. It checks to us, and we decide to bet our second pair. This bet could weed out most aces or under pairs to the king, but the small blind makes the call, and the limper folds. We go heads up to the turn. The turn comes a deuce of clubs, which shouldn't really change anything. Small blind checks. We try another bet this time for 135. Looking back, I think it's better to check here for pot control, but my thought process at the time was to charge any drawing hands or floating aces, giving them a bad price to call. The small blind ends up making the call, and we go to a river. The river comes a 9 of hearts. The small blind ends up going all in for about 300. I let out a random grunt, which the dealer misconstrues as a call. I'll just let you guys watch.
Heads up. All of those 6. Call?
No.
No.
He said,
I should have pushed you all in the turn.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
After I clarified that I was folding, I decided to show my hand, and the player's a gentleman flips over pocket kings for top set, showing that we made the correct laydown. Thankfully, we didn't catch a set and give him a full double up and live to fight another day. Nothing notable for a few hands, but we're still waiting for the live stream and look at the list and notice we're pretty far down. Then the button circles back and we look down at every No Limit player's dream starting hand, pocket aces. 3 players limp, and I open to $30. 5 players end up making the call. Our dream situation just turned into a slightly uncomfortable situation. I guess we get to play the whole hand in position, so that's good at least. This is actually likely why the table made the call, because my raise looked like a squeeze play with 3 limpers and the blinds. We go 6 ways to a flop of Jack 8-5 with 2 clubs. The aggressive husband from earlier decides to lead for $60. The middle position player flats, and I put in a raise to 160.
How much you got back there? Can I see your chips? Raise? 160?
It folds back to the initial raiser. He calls, and middle position puts in the call. The turn comes a 5, and the aggressive husband announces all in. Middle position only has a little left. He makes a quick call, and I make the call.
I call.
Call.
The river comes a 10 of hearts. We flip over our aces, and both players are reluctant to show, which is a really good sign for us. They don't end up showing and muck their cards. We scoop the entire pot over $1,000. And now, looking down at a massive mess of chips, I try to compose myself as the next hand is dealt. And then we look down at another premium hand. You can't see it here, but we're dealt the ace-king of spades. I'm not even able to properly play the hand because I have all these chips in my way. Somehow it checks down to showdown and we end up taking down the pot. And then, all good things happen in threes, right? And no, I don't mean the other ace I just got dealt. I'm talking about...
Lock it up.
Good luck, Tyler.
That's right. We just got called for the 2-5 deep stack live stream at Best Bet in Jacksonville after a massive winning session of over 5 times our buy-in. I rack up and go to the cage, cash out all my big chips, and bring the $1,500 maximum to the live stream. Alright everyone, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed sweating these hands, make sure to leave a like and a subscribe because it'll really help out the channel. If you really enjoyed it and can't wait to see the live stream action, then hit the bell so that YouTube lets you know when it's uploaded. I hope to have it done soon, and I'm super excited to share it because I get into one of the biggest pots of my life, live on the internet. Alright everyone, good luck at the tables, and see you in the next episode.